Hello, everyone, and welcome to And There You Go, a podcast about life. Whether you're hanging from a cliff by one hand or laughing your ass off, we'll cover it all. And now your co-hosts, Addie and Chad. Hey, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Do you know what porcupines smell like?
No. No? What?
Yeah, what porcupines smell like. Apparently they smell like onions.
Oh.
I just found that out. My sister just sent me a text, and she was out for a walk, and she walks on a trail where it's a wooded area, and apparently she came across, she said she started smelling something that smelled like onions, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. And then she looked up, and in a tree close to the trail were two porcupines.
Oh.
And she got home, and she Googled, I don't know. I don't know if she Googled, what do porcupines smell like? But, maybe something like that. But she found that they do smell like onions.
Interesting.
And
I'm glad she didn't get too close.
No. And so that was, in essence, her public service announcement to me this morning.
Yeah. That's pretty good.
So thank you, Julie. Hey, today we're going to talk about something that is a part of my story. People know that if you've listened to previous episodes, you know that I'm alcoholic, and along my journey, I've employed different tools to help in my recovery process, but not just my recovery process, but my life transformation efforts. And one of those tools is what I want to talk about today, or what we're going to talk about today, and that is the 12-step programs. So whether that's AA for Alcoholics Anonymous or NA for Narcotics Anonymous. Did you know that there's all kinds of other anonymouses out there too? I mean, there's Overeaters Anonymous, there's Gambling Anonymous, Sex Addiction Anonymous type things.
Uh-huh.
So
Cross addictions
too. Yeah, absolutely. And there's even 12-step variations for people who are loved ones of people in active addiction or recovering from addictions.
Which I've been to.
So what that tells me is that what's the common ground with that is it's the 12 steps, right? And so the 12 steps are malleable in some way, right? So I guess before I get too deep into that, I get excited about talking about this. I have fun talking about this. So there's a lot of stigma and misconceptions and apprehensions. You said a plethora of feelings about the 12 steps. Some are positive, some are negative, some are informed, some are not informed. And so I just kind of want to talk through my experience with the 12-step program, what it did for me, what it didn't do for me, and just kind of maybe break it down a bit so it's understandable for folks out there. Because in kind of similar to the notion that the 12 steps can be used, for many different types of addictions and situations like that, the 12 steps, there's a lot of good wisdom in there that everybody could use, believe it or not. And I'd like to point some of that out as we go through this. So the way I want to start out is how did I get involved with the 12-step program? I got involved not because I wanted to. I had this aversion to it. I didn't know anything about it. I just had these perceptions that came from TV shows or jokes I heard or other people talking about it, that it was, this really hyper-religious type. Cultish, this kind of thing. And so I didn't think about that even when I was in the throes of my addiction. I had a doctor say, well, AA is pretty good. You might want to try that. And it's like, I don't think so, buddy. When I went to outpatient treatment, my first stint in treatment, the one that didn't take, I went through treatment again after that, I was required to go to AA meetings and getting a sponsor. And then when my counselor said that, I said, you want me to do what? Are you kidding me? I don't want to do this. This notion of going to a group and talking about what was going on with me when I, number one, didn't believe it at that point in time.
You didn't believe what?
I didn't believe that I was addicted necessarily. Okay. I knew I had a problem, but I didn't think I was like one of those people. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't sure about that from that perspective. I wasn't comfortable with this notion of going and exposing what was inside of me to other people, sharing and talking about things.
And trusting.
Yeah, absolutely. The trust. I didn't want to admit that I was at that point, that I needed that kind of help. I was mostly going through treatment to placate the court system at that time. So I had this real aversion to it.
And that's not unusual, going to something like that to placate.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I know that any number of people that I was in treatment with and then subsequently worked with, when I worked in the recovery field, would flat out say, I'm just here because I get a reduced sentence, or my wife will take me back, or any kind of a reason like that, which unfortunately isn't a great reason to be there. But it's a natural thing for people to do. So I kind of wanted to start this out by talking about my first experience going to a meeting. So I was required to go to a meeting, and I found a meeting, an 8 a.m. meeting on a Saturday, because I'm a morning person, and I thought, okay, I'll go to this, and how many people are going to really be at an 8 a.m. meeting? And quite a few, I found out. Yeah. So again, with this notion of having this massive aversion and this extreme anxiety about going to do this, I went to the parking lot of this place, and it was an old train depot, a small train depot in a suburb in the area that I lived in, and it had been converted to a coffee shop, and it also had a kind of a gathering room or an events room attached to it. So I thought, that's kind of a quaint, cozy place to go. And so I went there that Saturday morning, the first morning, and I sat in my car right until the very last minute, because I wasn't going to go in. I was uncomfortable going to church, and this felt like going to church. And I didn't like the social aspect of church.
As an introvert? As
an introvert, very much so, as a deeply seated introvert.
And I get it, because I'm an introvert too.
Right. And so that makes it difficult. In addition to this notion of bearing my soul and, all of that stuff. So I sat in my car, and I was watching people, and cars would pull into the parking lot, and people would go into the building. And I was sitting there wondering, well, there's a coffee shop in there, and then there's a meeting coming up. Are these people going to the meeting, or are they just there for coffee? And I couldn't tell the difference, which was kind of a aha second, not a moment, but a second for me. It's like, okay, so I can't tell, big deal. So time rolls around, and I make my way in, and you walk through the coffee shop, and it just smelled great. And it was a neat little building, kind of a brick and wood type of a feel to it. And I made my way through the coffee shop and headed to the door to the events room. And right at the door was this big burly guy standing there with a great big grin on his face. And I thought, oh, crap, here we go. This is just like going to church. And, they have greeters at church and everything. So I walk up, and he sticks out his big meaty hands, and, says, hey, welcome. Glad you're here. You look like you're new. Welcome. It's like, God dang it. It's like, I didn't want that. And so, because I'm just in a sour mood to start with. Well, it's like, come on, don't make me feel all, slap happy and all that stuff.
Yeah.
What was your question?
I think I would just imagine, because I've gone to open AA meetings, that you just wanted to almost be invisible.
Exactly.
Like a fly on the wall. You just wanted to observe. You didn't want to have to share.
Yep. That was my whole strategy, that I was there as an invisible man, if at all possible. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do that, because I had no clue what the meetings were like, other than you had to talk about touchy-feely stuff, and I wasn't a touchy-feely guy at that time. I mean, I was, inside, but not outwardly with other people. Mm-hmm. So it's just the anxiety. That's going to be a big word in this, is anxiety as we go through this. But I walked through the door after big burly guy, kind of made me really uncomfortable. And I looked around the room, and it was kind of a long rectangular room. And along the perimeter of the room, there were a lot of chairs, and there were even church pews that they had brought in just as kind of cool seating and stuff. And it's like, that just kind of didn't sit well with me, because it added to that feeling of the churchy or culty kind of feel to it. In the center of the room, there was a big table, and there were people seated around there. On one corner to the back a little bit, there was a table that had the 12 steps and the 12 traditions listed on big placards. And they had brochures and different information about the 12 steps and service opportunities and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty common in most meetings. They'll have a resource area. What I also noticed was that at the back of the room there was a stage, because it was an events room. And on the stage there were a series of, or rows of chairs, and the one in the far back corner was open. And so Mr. Invisible here made a beeline for that. And as I was passing through the room, it struck me that, all these people here are chatting it up, and some of them are laughing, and, it seems like they know each other. And I thought, man, I just feel so out of place here. So I get to the back, find my chair, and on my chair, as there were on every chair, there was a big book, which is the AA 12-step main book. It's called the Big Book. And it kind of had the heft of a Bible, and that kind of concerned me. So, we were waiting for the meeting to start, so I just started thumbing through, and I found the page where the 12 steps are actually listed, and I started reading through those. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to do this as a checklist. I'm going to get through this as easy as possible. And so I started reading them to see if I could check them off in my head. And the first one, it's like, I read that, and it's like, yep, I think I can do that, fudge it at least, and check it off. And I got through and, got maybe halfway through, and all of a sudden everybody in the room stands up, and I'm going like, what is going on here? It's like, and they move to the center of the room. And so I follow suit, because I don't want to stand out, I just pretend like I know what I'm doing. And then everybody grabs hands to the person on either side of them. I thought, oh my Lord, what's going on now? This is not what this guy, Mr. Not Touchy-Feely, wants to be able to do or have to do right now. And I just was like, good Lord. And so then they started in with what is a traditional opening in the AA meeting. So that's the Serenity Prayer. And the Serenity Prayer is basically just 3 lines. It's, God, grant me the serenity. So right there, God. So we're praying. Are we praying? Is that what we're doing here, folks? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change to the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, which is really good wisdom when you stop and think about it. But I didn't know it. So I didn't want to feel stupid either, or look stupid. And so I tried to mumble it. If you've tried to mumble a prayer or something like that when you don't really know it, and you try to copy the words of the person next to you, and, the words that I could hit, like, God, grant me the serenity, and say it just a little bit louder so that they can hear. It's like, oh yeah, this guy knows what he's doing, when I really, truly didn't. And the courage to know the difference. And then there was an amen. And it's like, whoa, okay, this is really too much like church for this guy's liking. We went back to the chairs and sat down, and I got to thinking, damn that big burly guy at the door. He didn't give me a program. Everybody else seems to know what's going on, what the protocol is here. He didn't give me a program like you get in church. If this is going to be like church, you give me a program, tell me when to stand up, sit down, pray, greet each other, sing, whatever. But I didn't get that. So I just like...
I'm sorry, but I've never heard singing in an AA meeting, but have you?
No, but...
Just wondering.
No, I'm talking about in church.
Well, no, I get it. I know. I knew what you meant. It's just, it was funny in my head, I guess.
I don't know. Maybe there's an AA meeting out there where they sing. I don't know.
I don't know either.
So anyway, we're sitting there, and then what happens usually in most meetings is that they'll open the meeting, and they'll go around the room, and everybody introduces themselves. And the way that you introduce yourself in a 12-step program is you say your first name, and then you say what you are, an addict or an alcoholic. And Lord, I didn't want to do that because I didn't know. I wasn't certain. I wasn't convinced that I was alcoholic. But because I didn't want to stand out, I said it. So it came around to me. And I had this fear, this terror of speaking out loud in groups like that ever since I was young. And, as it came towards me, that anxiety would build up inside me. And there's that anxiety word again. This was just riddled with anxiety this whole time. And it got to me, and I just found myself saying, Chad, alcoholic, first time here. And big applause. And it's like, whoa, settle down, people. It's like, I don't need that attention, So for each first timer, they'd applaud because it was the big deal. And it really is a big deal to walk over the threshold into what could possibly be a life-changing or a life-saving experience. That's a big deal.
It is.
So I don't want to discount that in any way, shape, or form.
And there are also people there who are not addicts, alcoholics.
Yes, good point. Good point. And so you have some exposure and experience with this, don't you?
I do.
So
yeah.
you've been to meetings.
Open
So
meetings.
So there's a distinction there. There's different types of meetings, different formats of meetings. There's the open meeting versus the closed is probably the biggest. The open meeting is open to anybody who wants to come to the meeting. So that could be addicts and alcoholics. It could be family members. It could be somebody who's just curious about AA. I've been in meetings where there have been students who are assigned to go to an AA meeting for coursework, just to learn about it. So that's open.
That's excellent.
Yeah, it really is. And because not everybody who becomes a licensed counselor has gone through addiction themselves, but it's really important that they learn about this.
Yeah,
so,
I even had in one meeting a man just said his name and codependent.
Yeah. Okay. I haven't heard that one, but sure. And so, I kind of lost track of where we were going with this, but it was just kind of the protocol of the meeting. So, people would introduce themselves. And so after that, then there are a number of different readings that are done, parts of the big book and other things that are traditionally read at the start of the meeting, just to kind of level set everybody on why we're here. What the purpose of the meeting is. Then there's some announcements, so service opportunities, or if they need people to step into roles for the specific group that you're at, there'll be different announcements like that. And then you get into the main part of the program, and there are different formats, and that's where I want to come back to that. So there are different formats of the meeting. So the open versus closed. There's meetings that strictly go through the 12 steps. So they'll start with step 1, they'll read through a part of it, and then there'll be discussion, and then next time they'll go to the next step, and then so on and so on. There's another companion book, The 12 Traditions, and that's sometimes studied in the same way. And there's others that are a big book format where they start with the book itself, the main AA book or the NA book or whatever book you're using, and they'll start from cover to cover and just go through the whole thing. There's others where there's stories. There's a story section in the big book. They'll just do the stories. So a lot of different formats, and some of them are read and then discuss. Some of them you might have a couple of people tell their stories and then discuss. Or there might be a speaker that comes in, so a lot of different formats. And when I talk to people about whether or not they want to participate in a 12-step program, my advice to them is to go to as many different meetings as you can so that you can get a flavor of the different formats, but also because different groups have different cultures in them. Some of them are, like basically Bible thumper groups, big book thumping, where they strictly adhere to every little detail. Others are a little bit more relaxed. One of them that I went to, I was on the road, and I was going to stop in at a meeting, and I got there, and out front of the meeting center was a bunch of Harleys. And I thought, oh, God, what did I get into? Because I was dressed as kind of a yuppie, kind of a, business casual kind of a look.
Yeah.
And I walk in, and everybody's in leather. And I thought, oh, God, what did I get myself into? But I tell you what, it was one of the best meetings I went to. They looked at me, and I looked at them, and they all got big smiles. Welcome. Come on in. Sit with us. Let's talk. What's your story? There's big meetings. One of the biggest meetings that I ever went to was over 300 people. And it was a speaker series and a reading series, and it was amazing. The smallest meeting I had was just me and another guy. I went to a place called in Allano, and that's a clubhouse that's designated, a building that's designated for meetings, and they've got those around the country. And got in there, and there were all kinds of cars in the parking lot, but there was nobody in the building. And so I was wandering around the building from room to room, and I couldn't find anybody. And finally, I run into this one old guy. He said, "You here for a meeting?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, that's unfortunate. We don't really have any meetings today. We've got our annual pig roast going on out back," which explains why I didn't see anybody in the building. He said, "But do you want to have a conversation? Do you want to talk?" And so I sat with this guy, this old timer. They call people who have been in the program a long time old timers, not necessarily age wise, but they've been in the program for a long time. And we traded stories, and it was a beautiful conversation, and it was fantastic. And so, all kinds of different experiences. And so don't go to one meeting and say, this isn't for me. Go and explore like you should do, like if you're looking for a car or whatever, check things out and really take a look at what's out there for you. So coming back to the meeting kind of format. So the meeting that I was in was a 12-step reading. So read a section of one of the steps and then have a discussion about it, which I didn't know, of course, because Big Burly Guy didn't give me that damn program. So, I just was kind of playing along. And the moderator of the group said, "Can I get somebody to volunteer to start off the reading?" And so a guy over in the corner, and I just picture him off in the corner from where I was, and he raised his hand and said, "I'll start out reading." And I thought, okay, this is cool. We'll just sit back and just read, and I hope he just reads for the whole time, and I can, just kind of daydream and whatnot. And which is kind of what I did until I hear him say, "Pass." And then the next person picks up the reading. And what I realized is after a few times people said pass is that people are reading a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs, and then passing to the next person. We're taking turns reading. And to my further horror, I noticed that the passing was coming my way around the room.
It's like you're in elementary school again, and you're trying to read your passage.
Right.
Practice it in your head.
Yeah, well, that's what I did. I started counting. I knew where it was going to end, and I started counting paragraphs, and I started counting people, and I did the math in my head, and it's, oh, shit, that's coming to me.
Yeah.
It's going to get to me, and the anxiety, the wave of anxiety just, right in my stomach. And this wave grew bigger and bigger as it got closer and closer. I thought, oh, my God, because I do not do well reading in front of crowds, groups of people. And I just didn't want the spotlight on me. I didn't want any of that, but it was coming towards me. And at one point I heard somebody say, so-and-so alcoholic, pass, but they didn't read anything. And light bulb, there's an out. I can just do that. But the crazy part was I was still terrified because I still had to say those words out loud, and I'm filled with anxiety and I'm kind of shaking, and it's like, and so it just gets closer and closer, and I keep planning and repeating those words in my head, Chad, alcoholic, pass,
I understand completely.
Yeah. And by the time it gets to me, there's this huge wave of anxiety just crashing over me, and I say the words and the reading continues on, and I'm trying to recover from my anxiety attack here. And it gets to the end of the reading, and I thought, oh, God, what next now? Because there's still about, half hour left in the meeting. And the moderator said, okay, who would like to start the talk? Of course, I'm going, not this guy, I'm not talking it. And the moderator said, can I get a volunteer? And the same SOB that raised his hand to read said, I might as well start talking because I started reading.
And here's what I noted going to the meetings myself.
Yeah.
Is that they'd often have people that had been in the program for a long time tell their story.
Yeah.
But sometimes the thing is that you've heard it so many times. It would be nice if they had other people do it.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that can happen even if you're passing on talking, because the format of this meeting was that you were allotted maybe 2-3 minutes, but nobody really kept time and nobody cut anybody off. Mm-hmm. But you would get those people who liked to talk, and it would get stuck on them.
Yeah.
And, after I had been at one of the meetings for quite a while, there was this one gentleman, an old timer, who did like to hear himself speak. Mm-hmm. And he often retold the same story over and over again. And when it got to him, you could just see people go, oh God, here we go again.
I know, because aren't there are specific protocols or rules behind how you react to whatever. I mean,
Yes and no. I mean, one thing that is big is that there's no crosstalk, meaning you can't just start a conversation with the person or interject or make comments. You're supposed to just let that person speak their piece
yeah.
and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
And you can refer back to them when it's your turn. Or, if you open up the room at the end, they'll say, is there anybody else who wants to say anything? Any burning desires to talk about is often the phrasing on that. So this guy spoke, and he spoke for a couple of minutes and passed. And okay, it's like I knew what was coming now. And so that wave of anxiety that I had before when it was just reading was now magnified, and it was like a bloody tsunami coming at me, this tsunami of anxiety. Because I didn't know the language. I didn't know how to talk like these people. I didn't know what to say about myself. I didn't want to say anything about myself. And I also knew I had to pass. But I still had this just filled with this anxiety as it was coming to me, because I still had to say some words in here. And I felt like I really should say something, because what does that look like, if I'm not saying something and everybody else is saying something? But I also realized other people were passing as they went along, just not ready to talk, not comfortable talking, maybe simply didn't have anything to say as it was happening.
Likely, do you think that most of the people in the room have anxiety of some kind or another?
Yeah, without question. Without question, a lot of people do, especially newer folks, but even some of the people who have been there, people just have, in general, they have anxieties about speaking up in public or speaking about themselves. It's a hard topic to talk about. But here's the thing, what I learned. So as these people were talking, and it took me a number of meetings before I got over this anxiety and focus on that it was coming to me, and I just needed it to get past, that I started to listen to people as they were talking. I started to listen when they were reading, and then tying back to what they were talking about to what was talked about in the reading. And I'll be damned if I didn't start hearing myself and my story in what people were saying. And that kind of really shifted my thinking about being in these meetings, that, okay, maybe I don't have to say anything. Maybe it's just enough to listen and to learn about myself from these other people's stories. And so I started doing that. And eventually I was able to talk. But this first meeting, that tsunami crashed over me, that tsunami of anxiety, just obliterated any sense of self-esteem, self-worth, and I was sweating and shaking, and it went past and got to the end, and then all of a sudden everybody stands up again, moves to the middle of the room. First meeting here, because I don't know what's going on, because big burly guy, he let me down. And everybody grabs hands again, and they start saying the Lord's Prayer. And I thought, if this isn't church, I don't know what is. Then the Lord's Prayer ends, and then that was the end of the meeting, and people are milling around and talking. But I made a beeline for the door, right past big burly guy, and right out to my car. And I sat there for probably about 10 minutes, just decompressing from the experience. It was just awful. But what I found out is kind of what I alluded to before. As I continued to go to meetings, I started to hear myself in the stories of others. And, the first time that I made a run at doing the 12 steps, I did get a sponsor. I did work through all the 12 steps. I didn't do it as thoroughly as I should have at that time, because I still wasn't convinced that I was, full-blown alcoholic. The second time I went through, it worked because I talked about the things I didn't talk about the first time I went through the 12 steps. I followed the 12 steps to a T, and I got just a really solid sponsor. Sponsorship is really important, because you need somebody to kind of guide you through all of this, and you need somebody who's going to be there, if you're struggling, and kind of give you support and give you encouragement. And the sponsor that I had the second time through was really good. What I did to find a sponsor, and this is what a lot of people do, is that you listen to people as they're talking. And, at the end of meetings, they'll say, who here is willing to be a sponsor? And you raise your hand if you are. And so as you're listening to people speaking, you identify people who are kind of resonating with you, with whether it's, similarities in your story, or you like how they talk about the content of the 12 steps, however that might look to you. And then if they raise their hand at the end, you just go ask them, I'm looking for a sponsor. Are you available? Would you be willing?
Was that scary to do too?
It's incredibly scary.
Yeah.
Incredibly scary.
Afraid of rejection, or
yeah.
afraid they'll say yes.
Yeah.
Because then you're
hooked. Yeah.
You're
You're obligated. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I approached one guy, and he said, yeah, I have room, but before I work with you, I want you to do something. I want you to take the big book home, and I want you to read page 1 from the start to page 164. And those are the pages, as a side note, those are the pages where the meat of the program is. What follows that are a series of stories and indexes that have, supporting text and content to the 12 steps. But the core of the program is pages, right from the start to 164. He said, I want you to go home and I want you to read that. I said, but I've read it. He said, no, you go home and you read it. And this time I want you to pay attention to what's being asked of you. I want you to read it, and you decide if you're willing to do all of those things. And if you're not willing, then I'm not going to work with you. I'm not going to half-ass this with you.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I did, and I was very sincere about it. This was the second time I went through, when I went through inpatient treatment, and this was after I got out of that, and I was going through outpatient treatment. And I read it, and I went back to him. He said, good, I'm glad. Now we're going to read it again. It's like, excuse me, Phil, what? We're going to read it again. This time, you and I are going to read it together out loud. And this was the beauty of this sponsor. He was a drill sergeant, which is what I was looking for. I wanted somebody who was no nonsense and really did the work, because I needed to do the work. Mm-hmm. And he traveled a lot, but he would call me from the road and spend an hour with me on the phone reading through passages of the big book until we got through that. And it was beautiful, because as we went through it, he would point out things in there and help me understand certain passages. And we'd actually get to a certain point, and he said, Chad, do you believe in what that just said? Do you believe that you're kind of stuck and you're not able to do this on your own? And I said, yeah, I'm really feeling that. He said, boom, you're done with step 1. I would never have figured that out, because that is step 1.
Yeah, I know.
And so he took me through, and there was a passage there, and there was a little section that was a prayer. And he said, read the prayer. Do you want to pray that with me? I said, boom, you're done with that step now. And I would never have known this. And so it was really a tremendous, tremendous experience, and I owe a lot to that man. So what I want to do next with all of this, now let me pause here. Do you have any questions up to this point? Because I know, like we talked about, you do have some experience with this, some direct experience with this, but also as somebody, kind of maybe not fully immersed in it like I was, do you have any questions at this point?
I am interested in learning about Al-Anon and your take on that at some point.
Sure.
In all of this.
Sure.
Because of personal experiences that I had.
Yeah.
I'm also curious what you think of the open meetings as an alcoholic or addict, to having other people come in.
Yeah. I can say from my personal experience, I wasn't bothered by them, because at that point, when I finally got comfortable talking in the meetings, I realized this is a part of me, and I don't have any shame in talking about this. And if me talking can help somebody else, so talking in a meeting there's two purposes to that. One is to help me, process my own stuff, but it's also for others to hear it and maybe take something away from it. It's exactly why we're doing this podcast. Our stories might help somebody else down the road.
That's right.
So I personally didn't have any problem with it. And as I think about the perceptions and sometimes negative perceptions and even stigmas about meetings and alcoholism, I actually welcome that, so that people learn about it. And I think it's healthy for people to learn about it. Now, other people are not comfortable with that, and that's why there are closed meetings. And that's cool too. If you're not comfortable with that, sometimes, if there's a chance that somebody from your community who's not an addict or alcoholic, who doesn't understand, they might be in that meeting, and maybe you don't want to have that encounter or have that awareness that you're in that meeting too.
Well, and maybe you just don't want them to know your story.
Exactly.
Not everybody keeps quiet.
Right. And that's, one of the biggest tenets of AA is that it is anonymous. It's supposed to be anonymous, and that what happens in a meeting stays in the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
We're all human though, so some of that sometimes gets out, which is really, truly, truly unfortunate. Now, I'll go back and talk a little bit about Al-Anons, because that's another format of meetings. But I've never been to an Al-Anon meeting, so I can't say exactly what those are like. But the intent of those meetings is to tap into the power of the 12 steps. And by power, I'm not talking about the God power or anything like that, but the types of actions that are involved in the 12 steps to really help the loved ones of people who are struggling with addiction to alcohol and drugs. So it's really a place for them to come together for support and to help process what they're going through as well. So kind of a parallel path to it. Now again, it's not for everybody. I've heard good things and I've heard not so good things.
No, I think that I didn't give it a chance as much as I should have.
Yeah.
I did go to several different meetings and then chose one, and it seemed unhealthy to me.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not a good experience. And maybe I just wasn't in a place personally where I was ready for it.
Yeah.
But after a few of those meetings, I did say something, and I surprised myself because I'm careful with what I say, and I can speak in front of people,
Mm-hmm.
but I have trouble with like the round table types of things. But I finally had to say, I can't come back. I can't come back because this doesn't feel healthy to me. Not only have I dealt with somebody who's an alcoholic, but he abused me. And what I'm hearing from some of you is praise for staying with somebody who's abusive to you.
Sure.
And I can't do that because I can't stay anymore. He's killing me.
Yeah. And so I think that's kind of where the fine line exists. When I talked about this isn't a substitute for things like, mental health issues or significant relationship issues. This is really to help you deal with the addiction part of it. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like what you experienced was something that needed to be handled outside of this.
Right. They were all struggling with somebody that they loved that were alcoholics or addicts. But the way that they would present it was, I'm here because I don't want to leave. I'm here because I love them and I don't want to leave. But here's all the things that they do that are hurting me. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I am just past that at this point because I'm going to end up dead.
Yeah.
If I stick this out, because I know for sure that addiction is not a character issue, but when you put addiction in with somebody who has poor character to begin with, it's even worse.
Right. Yeah. And I think, that's, again, that fine line between group support and therapy. And if you're just dealing with the addiction and you want to stay with somebody because you believe that they're fundamentally a good person, but they're caught up in this battle with this substance, and you want to help them get off of this substance, and they're a good person and they're worth being with. But if they're not a great person, on or off the substance, and it's an unhealthy relationship, see, that's something that's bigger than what the 12 steps was designed to deal with.
Yeah. And so I felt as though they were counseling each other on the relationships instead of counseling about the addiction.
And that's exactly it. That's the point. And that's what really should not happen. And that's where, any sponsor who starts to act like a therapist should be, well, you can fire sponsors. And, and
I ended
up
going to therapy.
Yeah.
And that helped me immensely.
I supplemented my work, or not supplement, but complemented my efforts, my overall efforts with AA and therapy and outpatient treatment. I had to have multiple tools in my toolkit to be able to accomplish what I accomplished for me. Other people, again, that they can go to AA and never see a therapist and never go to treatment, and they can get clean and stay clean the rest of their lives.
I know
which
several
is brilliant.
people who have done that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they don't go to meetings or anything. They just made that personal decision, and somehow they were able to do it on their own.
Yeah, and I've seen people that do it outside of AA as well. So there is no one single way that people get sober and stay sober. You have to try different things if you're serious about it. AA just happens to be one very well-known way that people can do it, and it is successful. I mean, millions of people around the world use it. The AA books have been translated into all kinds of different languages. It's used around the world, and it's successful. So millions and millions of people have gotten sober and stayed sober because of the AA program. So,
do you know the history behind AA and the big book?
I do, yeah, and it's more than what we should, can talk about here. But
Sure.
It really came, from a man's desperation. Bill W. is his name, and Dr. Bob. They are the people who established this, and it's really a cool story. There's actually a movie out about it too, but again, it's more involved to talk about this.
Yeah.
But it's really a neat story, and I encourage people to explore it, to see how it started, and how they were able to pull it together, in terms of a program, and put it in a book to help others. But again, for another time. What I'd like to do now is pause, and then we'll pick it up next time with kind of an exploration of how I explain the 12 steps to somebody who doesn't know anything about it or is really skeptical about it.
That sounds good.
And there you go.